I'm going last, which I interpret to mean I can just make some comments on what has already been said. Let me start out by talking about the situation in the Conference on Disarmament. As Jennifer said, the United States put forward a draft treaty on fissile materials. It did not include verification provisions. It's had some other peculiar provisions, such as that it would terminate within 15 years unless it was extended with objections from nobody. But it perhaps creates an opening of sorts, just that the United States has put it forward in the Conference on Disarmament. And, a fissile materials cutoff treaty, when I've talked within my organization about it, one of the objections I get is that you're causing my eyes to glaze over. But really, a fissile materials treaty is about the materials that are used to make nuclear weapons. If it was done in the way it is being proposed for now, it would simply cut off production of highly enriched uranium, HEU, and plutonium for use in weapons in the future. However, many countries, including influential countries like Canada, like South Africa, have said that negotiations on a fissile materials treaty should address in some fashion existing stocks as well. For instance, South Africa has said there should be provision in an FMCT that materials that are removed from warheads should then come under the control of the regime established by the FMCT. Canada has proposed that at least there should be parallel negotiations concerning how to deal with existing stocks. Let me go on to the question of summits and special sessions. There was a World Summit, Jennifer talked about a little bit, last fall that addressed many issues: climate change, suppression of terrorism, Human Rights Council, so on and so on, last fall. It failed to deal with disarmament non-proliferation, which Kofi Annan rightly called a disgrace. This is the new report of the Commission on Weapons of Mass Destruction, headed by Hans Blix, released June 1st at the United Nations. You can download this report at wmdcommission.org. In addition, my organization, Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy, along with Reaching Critical Will and Western States Legal Foundation, has a project to respond to the Blix report, and that website is wmdreport.org. One of the recommendations that was made by the Blix report, they have 60 of them, I'm just going to read it. It's recommendation 59. The General Assembly should convene a world summit. When you use the word summit, it seems to mean heads of state, so that's the significance of the word summit. A world summit on disarmament, non-proliferation, and terrorist use of weapons of mass destruction to meet after thorough preparations. This World Summit should also discuss and decide on reforms to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the UN disarmament machinery. So the Blix Commission saw what had happened at the summit last fall and decided there's a need to try again. And their proposed scope is nuclear, biological, chemical weapons, means of delivery, terrorism, basically the subject matter of their report. And it seems to me to be a pretty good agenda, because it would allow for dealing with commonalities and interrelationships among nuclear, biological, chemical. I like to call them NBC weapons, because as the Commission itself acknowledges, nuclear weapons are really the only true weapon of mass destruction. Certainly not chemical weapons. Conceivably, biological weapons could kill hundreds of thousands or millions of people, but in the typical circumstance, a nuclear weapon is really the true weapon of mass destruction. So this summit would deal with NBC weapons, allow for discussion of the interrelationships, and also deal with means of delivery. Dealing with means of delivery, notably missiles, ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, is crucial. I ask you to think about the following. Are major powers in the world going to give up their nuclear weapons if they know another country can aim a ballistic missile at them? You know, a ballistic missile that could be carrying a conventional warhead or a biological warhead or a chemical warhead or a nuclear warhead. So means of delivery also need to be dealt with. So the Blix Commission has a fair amount of influence around the UN and among governments. It got pretty good press coverage in the United States. We should think seriously about whether to really jump on this recommendation of the Blix Commission about the World Summit on NBC weapons. This contrasts to a special session on disarmament, first special session on disarmament, also called by the General Assembly, I think took place in 1978. It deals with all weapons, not only nuclear, biological, chemical, but all weapons. It's a perennial topic on the General Assembly's agenda, but it's not really going anywhere because in order for such a session to take place, it has to be funded. The United States doesn't want to fund it, so it gets stopped in the 5th Committee of the General Assembly, which deals with the budget. So I think the Blix Commission may have partly been thinking, well, let's take a fresh approach to this. There's some baggage attached to the special summit, which wouldn't necessarily be attached to there's baggage attached to the special session, which would not necessarily be attached to the World Summit. Let me go on to the third thing that I want to just comment on, and that's the role of the Security Council. Let me introduce this by reading another paragraph from the Blix report. This is from page 25. The report says, some of the current setbacks in treaty-based arms control and disarmament can be traced to a pattern in U.S. policy that is sometimes called selective multilateralism, and increased U.S. skepticism regarding the effectiveness of international institutions and instruments, coupled with a drive for freedom of action to maintain an absolute global superiority in weaponry and means of their delivery. What I want to draw your attention to here is this idea of selective multilateralism. As Jennifer talked about, basically there's been very little happening in terms of multilateral negotiations on nuclear disarmament since the 1996 completion of the CTBT. However, that does not mean there have not been developments in the international sphere. There have been, and you're probably aware of them. The G8 has funded a major cooperative threat reduction program to secure weapons and materials in Russia and perhaps in other countries. This is an example of what the Blix Commission is calling selective multilateralism. Another one is the Proliferation Security Initiative. Canada is a member. The idea is to prevent and, if necessary, intercept shipments of goods that might contribute to NBC weapons programs. So that's selective multilateralism. But there's something else entirely new that is happening, and that is that the Security Council has assumed a role as a global legislator. You may say, yeah, but the Security Council, right from the beginning, has been adopting resolutions that require countries around the world, for example, to put an arms embargo on a certain country, to boycott a certain country. It's true, the Security Council has adopted binding resolutions from the beginning, but they related to particular situations. With Security Council Resolution 1373 in the fall of 2001, following the 9/11 attacks, the Security Council started on this new path. It adopted a resolution which required every country in the world to adopt measures that responded to a global threat, the threat of terrorism. In the case of 1373, it was about preventing terrorist access to banking systems. It was about border controls. It was a requirement of prosecution of terrorists and so on. That was followed up in April of 2004 by Security Council Resolution 1540, which Alan talked about. And that, again, is imposing a requirement on every state in the world to respond to a global problem, and that is the risk of acquisition of NBC weapons by terrorists, and also trafficking in NBC weapons by non-state actor networks like the Khan network based in Pakistan. So every state is required to take steps regarding accounting and securing materials, border controls, law enforcement, export controls is an important part of this. So this is something we need to think about very carefully. Do we want the Security Council to sort of become the supreme legislator for the world? And my short answer to that is no. We want to have multilateral agreements like the NPT and the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty to be the major way that we deal with the problems of NBC weapons facing the world, because then you're involving all states, you're getting buy-in, you're getting expertise, you're getting legitimacy, you're getting democracy. But it also seems to be the case that the Security Council may be taking more and more of a role in these issues, and in fact, the Blitz report recommends that the Security Council take this role. And therefore, it's also important that we be thinking about how do you make the Security Council more democratic and more transparent.